Okay. Hello everyone and welcome to the first devlog for revolves. It's me, Vector gamedev. So development on revolves started back in May when I participated in the weekly game jam. The theme of the game jam was Year the End, and I made a little game about a virus going around and infecting people. At the time, the game was more about puzzle and trying to get the right combination of actions. But now I changed the game a bit, and I'll talk more about that in this video. So what is Viral Wars? Viral Wars is a local multiplayer battle game where you have the team of humans and viruses. So the idea is to create a session where you can have the virus side and the human side. And the human side needs to neutralize the virus, whereas the virus needs to infect the humans so that they can keep themselves alive. So that's the core concept of Viral Wars. I'm also looking into create a campaign so players can have a grasp of the human mechanics and the virus mechanics, and also this would be a place where the player can test new abilities, skills, and combinations of actions. So before I start talking more about the game itself, I'm just gonna quickly do an overview of the software that I'm using for this. So for this game, I'm using the Unity game engine. I'm using the latest version of Unity, and I'm gonna keep updating Unity until I reach a stable public demo where everything works, and then I'll keep this version until the end of the production. Okay, so for art development, I'm using Photoshop and Illustrator. For the coding, I'm using Visual Studio. To manage my tasks, I'm using Trello. So that's about it for the tech. I'm going to be doing an in-depth overview of the software that I use as well as the workflow. So if you're interested in seeing that, make sure you're subscribed. So the first thing I did once I decided to go through with this project was to develop the art style. So the challenge itself was to develop a really simple art style in terms of workflow and make sure that this actually looks good and player can identify the elements in the screen, and when it's combined it feels good and delivers a nice experience to the player. Okay, so I'm going to divide this into three different parts. So the first part is the virus. So for the virus, I developed its own shader, which I'm still working on, but for now I think it conveys the right message. There are a few things I want to add and a few things I want to improve, but for now it is what it needs to be. So the second part I'm going to talk about is the human. So the human uses a cell shaded look. This look was achieved by creating a custom shader as well, but for the human, I'm using a texture map instead of actually texturing the human itself. This is one of the things that I did to improve my workflow because I'm a solo developer. I don't really have time to texture every model. So what I'm doing is basically creating a texture map so I can pick and choose the colors I want without having to worry too much about the details in the texture. And because the cell shaded is a quite different and unique look, I don't have to work too much on the textures. The look itself is delivered by the shader. That is not to say that in the future I'm not going to add more details, but for now, that's where the shader is. So the last element I'm going to talk about is the environment, and for that I'm going to be using a simple shader. I might use the standard Unity shader. Alright, that's it for the art style. I'm still working on it. I'm going to be polishing this over and over again. But for now, I think this is the look that I want. This is what I was thinking when I started this project. And I think moving forward, all I'm going to do is just improve bit by bit. Alright, quick note before I move forward. The project itself is the same project that I used when I developed the game jam version of this game. I decided to go with the same project because I thought it would be easier to just move things around and change the code a bit. But I found out that actually that wasn't really a good idea for a number of reasons. First reason is I'm now using the Unity Universal Render Pipeline, which means I'm no longer using the built-in renderer, which I was using during the game jam, and now a lot of things changed and it was quite messy to kind of fix things and clean things up. Another thing is folder organization. For the game jam, I didn't really organize folders and I imported a bunch of different things at different times in different places. So the project itself was quite messy, And also, which I'm going to talk about in the future, is asset management, because there's going to be content that's going to be updated after the game is published. So the organization of the asset needs to be a lot more concise. So that process actually made things a lot harder to do as well. So if you're doing a game jam and you decided to finish your game or create a version of the game, if you have the time, consider doing a fresh project. So, local multiplayer. The game is all about local multiplayer. So the idea, the core of the game is the local multiplayer battles. Which is not to say that I'm not going to have online, but for now I'm not really thinking about the online. I want to make the local multiplayer work first, and then eventually I'm going to have the online support if there is enough demand for that. So to start things off, I started developing a main menu in which players could join in by connecting controllers and pressing a button. And basically every controller or every controllable device, such as keyboard, gamepads, Xbox controllers, PlayStation controllers, they can all control the main menu. But then once they join the local battle, they each have its own widget, which they can control to choose the characters and have a look at their skills and stuff like that. So the game at this point expects every player to be ready, and then they can join a map. So once the game loads the map, they always spawn in different locations. Those locations have not been organized yet. In the future, I'm going to be doing a selective spawning, which means I'm going to pick the different sites and spawn them in the positions that are close to each other, instead of just randomly assign them to different spawn locations. And the controlling for the multiplayer itself, it's quite simple when it comes to the local multiplayer, because each player has its own player input, which means that they have been mapped to its own device. So for example, if a player is in the keyboard joining the main menu, I'm saving that, and then once the level loads, I spawn the prefab, which then it's linked to the keyboard controller, which means only the keyboard is going to be able to control that character. And the same goes for the gamepad and the other controllers. And with the Unity's new input system, that was super simple to do. And all I had to do really is make the logic in the multiplayer locally itself kind of figure itself out. So that was fantastic. So as I said before, the local multiplayer instantiates a new player based on the device that has been attached to it during the main menu phase. So each prefab has a character controller, and I have two types of character controller. Right now I have the human character controller and the virus character controller. They both work in different ways, but they have the same core functionality. So a bunch of things can be done, like UI and player input can be done in the same manner across all of them, but they each have its own uniqueness. So that's why they have separate classes for them. So the human controller is using the nav mesh. So what I'm doing is basically I'm trying to calculate the position where the human wants to be, and then I check that against the nav mesh, and if that works out, then the player can move to that position. Now for the virus, I'm using a different approach. I'm just basically moving the transform, but I also check if there's a ground underneath the virus. At the moment, I think it's working fine. So the core mechanic for the Game Jam game was the infection mechanic, and that was what the players liked the most about that game. And I tried to kind of keep this the same way as it was, but I'm feeling that I'm kind of gonna have to change this in the future. So the way the infection mechanic works is the virus can target a human, and then once it gets close enough, press a button on the keyboard or on the gamepad, and then it starts the infection process. The infection process takes a bit of time, and in the Game Jam demo, I was doing a calculation to see how long it would take to infect the human, but I think for now in this game, I might have to change or adjust that a bit because of the other mechanics that will be implemented. So once this human is infected, it can then spread the infection to other humans. And this infection comes in 3 stages. The infecting stage, it's when the human is infected by the virus and it can spread the disease. And then after that, the player enters into a recovery mode where it cannot be infected. And then lastly, the human goes back to the normal state in which it can be infected and it doesn't spread any disease. It's basically cured, but the virus can then infect the human again. So that's how the infection mechanic works. As I said, I might change that in the future. I need to see how that plays out with the other mechanics that I'm going to implement in this game. But so far it's working and it's there. So I'm going to be testing this out. All right, so that's pretty much where the project is at the moment. I'll be doing more devlogs in the future to update you about those process that I'm going through, and new mechanics and new features and new systems and all that. So the game right now, it's in its very early stages, and what I want to do is get to a point where I can release a public version of this game as a demo so people can try it out and see what they think of the game. So if you're interested in seeing more about that, make sure you're subscribed and also give a thumbs up if you like the video. That would help me a lot. So I started this channel to share more about the development process of Viral Wars, as well as the process that I usually go through when I'm developing games. So this channel is really all about game development. So if you're interested in that, make sure you subscribe. And if that's something that you want to see more, I'm also doing live streams about the development process of Viral Wars. And I'm also planning in the future to do some live streams where I just like create a game from scratch in one day or something like that, and maybe interact with people and answer questions there. So if you have questions about game development, or if you just want to know something, where you can find some information, where can you start learning something, you can just drop in the chat and then I'll be happy to answer. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.